Hey everyone, thinking about jumping into the world of cruisers. Maybe the 2025 Indian Scout Bobber Limited has caught your eye.
It's a pretty popular choice.
Yeah, and for good reason, right?
Yeah,
But it's a big decision.
it is.
So we're here to help you figure out if it's the right bike for you.
Exactly.
We're diving deep into a review from bikermotorrider.com today.
Great site.
Yeah, and we'll compare it to some other bikes in its class, see how it stacks up.
Sounds good.
So what's the first thing that jumps out at you about this bike?
It's trying to hit that sweet spot, I think, in the cruiser market. You've got your classic cruisers, all about that raw power, and then you've got your modern cruisers packed with tech.
Right.
The Scout Bobber Limited is kind of trying to bridge that gap.
Yeah, I can see that. Just looking at the pictures, it definitely has that tough look.
It does.
Lots of blacked out features, chopped fenders, not your typical cruiser.
Nope. Definitely not. And they're playing up that modern retro vibe, with the limited edition color schemes, Thunder Black or Red Sunset.
Yeah, I saw those. Very cool.
It's all about appealing to a rider who wants a bike that feels, well, current, but still appreciates that cruiser heritage.
It's a popular trend these days,
Yes.
blending the classic style with modern features.
It is.
So let's get into the heart of the matter, the engine. This review mentions a 11,133cc V-twin.
Ah, yes.
What does that actually mean in terms of riding experience for someone who's not a gearhead?
Sure. Well, that 11,133cc V-twin translates to 100 horsepower, which is a lot, especially if you're new to cruisers.
Okay.
But the key here is that V-twin configuration. That means you're going to get that rumble, that pulsing that cruiser riders love.
Ah, so it's not just about speed, it's about feeling the engine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And how that power is delivered is important too. The Scout Bobber Limited has a 5-speed gearbox and electronic fuel injection, so you get a much smoother ride than, say, an older carbureted bike.
So you get the raw power, but with a little modern refinement.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah.
And speaking of modern, the review also mentions a 4.3-inch touchscreen display. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, this is where they're really leaning into the tech side of things.
Okay.
That touchscreen gives you all the essential info, speed, fuel range, gear position, even tire pressure.
Yeah.
Plus, it has Bluetooth, so you can connect your phone, play music, take calls, even get navigation.
Wow, that's a lot. I bet riders who are used to having that tech really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's about convenience and connectivity, something you wouldn't find on a traditional cruiser.
Okay, so we got the looks, the engine, the tech. Now let's get into the specs.
Okay.
The review has a comparison table.
Mhm.
It puts the Scout Bobber Limited up against some of its main rivals,
Yeah.
like the Harley Iron 1200, Yamaha Bolt R-Spec. What are some of the key takeaways there?
Well, on paper, the Scout Bobber Limited holds its own. It's got more horsepower than the Harley and the Yamaha.
So, quicker acceleration.
Yeah. And it's interesting, despite having that extra power, the price is right in between those two.
So, competitive on power and price. What about other stuff? Like torque, weight.
Well, that's where things get a bit more interesting. The Scout Bobber has 72.2 foot-pounds of torque, which is decent,
Okay.
but the Honda Rebel 1100 actually has a bit more.
Oh, interesting. So, what does that mean for someone riding? What's the real world difference?
Well, torque is basically your pulling power, how
Mhm.
quickly you can accelerate from a stop, how easily you can climb hills.
Okay.
So the Scout Bobber has plenty of power, but the Honda might have a slight edge in those situations.
So it's all about trade-offs.
Exactly. You have to decide what matters most to you. The V-twin feel,
Mm-hmm.
or that extra grunt off the line.
Right. So it seems like the Scout Bobber is aiming to be that well-rounded package.
Yeah.
Powerful and stylish with modern tech, but maybe not the absolute top performer in every single category.
Exactly. It's about balance.
Hmm.
And speaking of balance, let's talk about how comfortable this bike is to ride. The ergonomics. The review mentions a few features that are designed to make it a comfortable ride.
All right, let's hear it. What are they talking about?
Well, first off, the seat height is 25.6 inches. That's considered pretty low.
Okay,
So it's accessible to a lot of riders, even if you have shorter legs.
that's a good point. Some of those cruisers can feel like you're climbing a mountain just to get on.
Right. And it also has adjustable rear shocks.
Oh, nice.
So you can really fine-tune the suspension whether you want a plush ride or something a bit sportier.
So you can really personalize it, dial it in.
Exactly. They've really thought about how to make it comfortable for a lot of different riders.
That's great. So we've got the looks, the power, the tech, the comfort, but there's got to be some downsides, right? Every bike has them.
Of course. And one area where the Scout Bobber might fall short for some riders is fuel economy. The review doesn't give any specific numbers,
Uh-huh.
but it does mention that 12.5-liter fuel tank,
Yeah.
which might not be ideal for those long rides.
Yeah, if you're doing a lot of touring, that smaller fuel tank might mean stopping for gas more often.
Exactly.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, the review talks about the riding position being comfortable, but it doesn't say much about wind protection.
Oh, right.
So that might be something to consider. If you're planning on longer rides, you might need a windscreen.
So maybe not the ideal cross-country machine,
Maybe not.
but it sounds like it could be a blast for cruising around town or hitting those scenic back roads.
Absolutely. And speaking of cruising, the review does mention a few details that add to the experience.
Ooh, I love the details. What are we talking about?
Well, for example, the limited edition has custom leather seats with enhanced badging, that
Nice.
premium feel.
So it's not just performance, it's about that feeling of, like, exclusivity.
Exactly. And don't forget the sound.
Oh, yeah,
That V-twin is going to turn heads wherever you go.
I bet it does. All right, so we've talked about the engine, the tech, the specs, even some of the little details. But what about the actual riding experience? What does the review say about what it's like to ride this thing?
The reviewer raves about the handling, says it handles like a dream.
Really?
Yeah, thanks to the low center of gravity and those responsive brakes.
So it's nimble, easy to control.
That's what it sounds like. Easy to handle in traffic or on those winding roads.
That's good to hear, especially for someone who might be, a little intimidated by a bigger bike.
Yeah.
What about longer rides, though? We talked about the fuel tank, the wind protection, but did they say anything about the comfort on those longer hauls?
Well, they don't go into a lot of detail, but they do mention that the riding position is pretty relaxed, so it's probably more comfortable than, say, a sportier bike where you're hunched over.
Right.
So maybe not built for long-distance touring, but comfortable enough for, weekend rides, those shorter adventures.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so comfort is one thing, but what about safety? Does the review mention any safety features that stand out?
It does. It highlights the standard ABS anti-lock braking system.
Now, for someone who's not really up on motorcycle safety features, why is ABS important?
Well, ABS is crucial, especially for new riders. It prevents the wheels from locking up if you have to brake hard, which can cause you to skid and lose control.
Oh, okay.
With ABS, the system kind of pulses the brakes automatically to help you stop safely.
So it's like an extra layer of protection in those emergency situations.
Exactly. And it's standard on the Scout Bobber Limited, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
Shows that Indian is taking safety seriously.
Yeah, that's good. The review also mentions riding modes.
Yeah.
Can you explain what those are?
Sure. Riding modes are becoming more common on bikes. They let you adjust the bike's performance, to match different conditions or how you like to ride. The Scout Bobber has two modes, Sport and Rain.
So how do they actually change the way the bike rides?
Well, Sport mode is for, sportier riding. It gives you a quicker throttle response, so the engine reacts faster when you twist the throttle. Rain mode is for slippery conditions. It softens the throttle response and adds more traction control to prevent the wheels from spinning.
So it's like having two bikes in one. You can choose between a more performance-oriented ride or a safer, more controlled ride, depending on the conditions.
Right. It just adds a level of versatility.
I like that. Okay, so we've talked about the engine, the tech, even the safety features. But just based on this review, what's your overall impression of the Scout Bobber Limited?
I think Indian has made a bike that's trying to appeal to a wide range of riders. It has that classic cruiser look, but with modern updates.
Right.
It's powerful enough to be fun, but not too intimidating for a newer rider. And it has features that make it comfortable and convenient.
So a good all-arounder.
I think so. But no bike is perfect. There are always trade-offs.
True. But I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about.
We have.
In the next part of our deep dive, we'll get into what it's actually like to ride the Scout Bobber Limited. Really explore that rider experience.
We'll also talk about some things to keep in mind before you make that final decision.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
All right, so we're back, and we're continuing our deep dive into the 2025 Indian Scout Bobber Limited.
Okay.
This time, we're really going to focus on the rider experience.
Okay.
We've talked about specs, we've talked about features,
Right.
but what's it actually like to ride this thing?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And I haven't personally ridden this particular model,
Sure.
but the review gives us some hints.
Okay.
It really emphasizes the bike's agility,
Agility.
which is, a little unusual for a cruiser.
Yeah, that is interesting because most people, when they think about cruisers,
Right.
they think about that sort of laid-back, heavyweight feel.
Yeah, that classic cruiser feel.
So what makes this one different?
Well, A couple of things. According to the review,
Okay.
the Scout Bobber Limited has a pretty low center of gravity. Okay.
Which helps it feel more planted, more stable.
Okay.
And when you combine that with responsive brakes, it sounds like a bike that you can really feel confident on, even at lower speeds.
So you're not going to feel like you're wrestling a bear through traffic.
Yeah, exactly. That's the impression I'm getting.
Okay.
And it sounds like that nimble handling, it works well on twisty roads, too.
Oh, okay.
The reviewer talks about how easily the bike leans into corners, almost like a sportier bike.
So you can have a little fun with it.
You can, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not just about cruising down the boulevard.
Right, right.
It can handle a bit of spirited riding as well.
Okay, so that's good.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of riders are looking for.
Yeah.
Even if they mainly want a cruiser, they still want a bike that can handle different types of riding, you know? That makes it more fun.
Absolutely. I mean, nobody wants to feel limited by their bike.
Exactly.
Speaking of limitations, though, we talked earlier about the Scout Bobber Limited's fuel tank
Right.
and how it might not be the best for those long-distance trips.
Right. But for, shorter rides, how does the review describe the comfort?
Well, they don't go into a ton of detail,
Okay.
but they do mention a comfortable riding position.
Okay.
And, those adjustable rear shocks that we talked about, those can really help dial in the right feel for you.
Sure, sure.
So there's some customization there.
That's good.
You can really make it your own.
Okay, so what about things like wind protection?
Right.
Is this going to be a bike that's, like, beating you up on the highway?
Well, the review doesn't specifically talk about wind buffeting, so that is something to keep in mind.
Okay.
If you're someone who's sensitive to that wind blast, you might want to think about adding a windscreen.
That's going to be an additional cost, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So, got to factor that into your budget.
Always think about those hidden costs.
Right. And, comfort is a really personal thing.
It is.
What feels good to one person might not feel good to another.
Right.
And it's worth noting the Scout Bobber Limited has a solo seat. So if you're planning on riding with a passenger,
Yeah.
it might not be the most comfortable for longer rides.
Right, yeah.
It's definitely geared more towards that solo rider style.
I mean, hey, maybe that adds to the cool factor, right?
It could, definitely.
Yeah, so we've talked about the handling, we've talked about the comfort, we've talked about the potential, lack of wind protection.
Right.
But is there anything else in the review that really stood out to you in terms of, like, what it's like to ride this bike?
Yeah, they talk about how planted and stable it feels at speed,
Okay.
which part of that is due to that low center of gravity that we talked about.
Right.
But it's also because this bike has some heft to it. It weighs about 550 pounds.
Okay, so it's not exactly a lightweight.
No, it's not.
So how does that weight, like, factor into the riding experience? Is it a good thing, a bad thing?
Well, it can be good in some ways, It adds to that feeling of stability on the road.
Okay.
But you do want to be aware of it, especially at lower speeds or, when you're maneuvering in tight spaces.
So parking lot speeds, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it might take a little more effort to handle it in those situations.
Okay, so you're saying it's probably a good idea to
actually get on the bike and try it out.
yeah, take it for a test ride.
Exactly, yeah.
You can read all the reviews in the world, but nothing beats actually getting on the bike and feeling it for yourself.
I completely agree.
So,
And the review, they touch on something that I think is really important, especially if you're thinking about getting your first cruiser.
okay, what's that?
It's about finding a bike that really fits, like, your personality and your riding style.
Yeah, it's not just about the bike itself, it's how it fits into your life.
Exactly, yeah.
Like, what are you looking for in a bike?
Right. Are you all about performance?
Uh-huh.
Or do you just want to cruise?
Right.
You want all the latest tech?
Right.
Or something a little more stripped down, a little more classic?
Right. So it's kind of like, you meet somebody
Right.
and maybe you're attracted to them at first, but for a real connection, you got to have something deeper,
Exactly.
something that really speaks to who you are as a person.
I love that analogy. It's so true.
Yeah, and like with relationships, the best way to know if that connection's there
Yeah?
is to actually spend some time together.
Right.
So you got to go out there and take that test ride.
You got
Don't just rely on the reviews.
Just rely on the specs.
Get on the bike, see how it feels.
Yeah.
Does it make you happy?
Right. Does it make you want to hit the open road and never come back?
Those are the questions.
Those are the important questions.
And to help you figure all of that out, we're going to dive into some final considerations in the last part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll talk about price, we'll talk about availability, and we'll talk about, what to really look for when you finally do take that test ride.
That's good.
Stick with us. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the 2025 Indian Scout Bobber Limited.
Well,
We've covered a lot.
we have.
The specs, the features, what it's like to ride.
Yeah.
But now let's get down to, like, the practical stuff.
Okay.
If you're really thinking about buying this bike,
Right.
what are some things you need to know before you even head to the dealership?
Well, the first thing is always price, right?
Of course.
And the Scout Bobber Limited, it's in a pretty competitive part of the market.
Okay.
It's not the cheapest cruiser out there,
Right.
but it's not the most expensive either.
Okay.
The review mentions a starting price that's pretty comparable to, the Harley Iron 1200, the Yamaha Bolt R-Spec.
So it seems like you're getting a good value for your money.
Yeah, I think so.
But the actual price, the up-the-door price, that's going to depend on a few things, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Dealer markup,
Uh-huh.
any accessories you might want to add?
Exactly. And speaking of accessories,
Yeah.
Indian offers a ton of accessories for the Scout Bobber.
I bet they do.
Saddlebags, windscreens, even performance upgrades.
Yeah, those things can add up.
They can. So just keep that in mind when you're figuring out your budget.
Yeah. It's easy to get carried away when you're excited about a new bike.
It is.
You want all the cool stuff,
Yeah, you want it all.
but you got to be realistic.
Right.
Now, the review mentioned that this is a limited edition model.
It is, yeah.
So does that mean it's going to be harder to find?
It could be, yeah.
Okay.
Limited editions, they usually have a shorter production run.
Okay.
So they might not be as easy to find as, the standard models.
Right.
So if you're really interested in this bike,
Mm-hmm.
it might be a good idea to call your local dealer.
Yeah.
Check on availability.
Okay.
Maybe even put down a deposit.
Yeah, don't wait till the last minute.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's say you've done your research. You know what you can afford.
Right.
You're ready to take that test ride.
Okay.
What are some things you should really be paying attention to when you're actually on the bike?
Well, the first thing, and it might seem obvious,
Yeah.
but it's comfort.
Comfort, yeah.
Pay attention to how the bike feels.
Okay.
Is the riding position comfortable for you?
Uh-huh.
Can you reach all the controls easily?
Right.
How does the seat feel, after you've been riding for a little while?
Yeah, comfort is so personal.
It is. It is. And on a cruiser, you're sitting more upright.
Yeah.
You're spending more time in the saddle.
Yeah, it's got to feel good.
It does. It does. And after comfort, I'd say pay attention to the handling.
Okay.
How does the bike feel at different speeds? Is it easy to maneuver at low speeds?
All right.
Does it feel stable on the highway?
Cruisers aren't really known for being, like, sporty handling bikes, are they?
No, not really.
But you still want it to feel, safe.
You do, yeah. You want it to feel predictable. You want to feel confident riding it.
Exactly. And what about the engine?
Yeah.
What should you be listening for when you're on that test ride?
Listen for any weird noises, any vibrations.
Okay.
The engine should sound smooth,
Right.
powerful. Pay attention to how that power is delivered. Does it feel responsive? Does it pull smoothly through the gears?
Okay.
That V-twin engine, that's a big part of the Scout Bobber's personality.
Right.
So you want to make sure it lives up to the hype.
Absolutely. And of course, the brakes.
Yeah.
How should they feel?
They should feel strong,
Okay.
responsive,
Uh,
but not like grabby
okay.
or too sensitive.
Right. And this bike has ABS, right?
It does. It does. ABS is standard.
Okay.
So you should actually feel that system working if you have to brake hard.
Really?
Yeah, you'll feel like a pulsing in the brake lever.
Interesting.
But that's just the system doing its job, helping you stay in control.
So it's a safety feature that you can actually feel.
Exactly.
That's good to know. Anything else that we should be checking out?
This might seem basic, but make sure everything works.
What do you mean?
Like the lights,
Okay.
the turn signals, the
Yeah.
horn.
Oh, right.
Test out that touchscreen display. Make sure it makes sense to you. It's easy to use.
Sure.
If you're planning on using Bluetooth, test that too.
It's easy to get caught up in the moment
It is.
and forget about the little things.
It happens.
Yeah. So make sure everything's working.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Of course. Yeah.
The salesperson is there to help you.
Right.
So if you're not sure about something, just ask, whether
Yeah.
it's about the bike or financing or anything.
Buying a motorcycle, it's a big decision.
It is.
There's no such thing as a dumb question.
I agree.
All right. Well, I think we've covered just about everything.
I think so.
We've talked about all the specs, all the features,
Mhm.
what it's like to ride.
The pros, the cons.
So the big question is the 2025 Indian Scout Bobber Limited the right bike for you?
Well, that's really up to you to decide.
Yeah.
We've given you all the information.
Right.
But you have to think about your riding style,
Uh,
your budget, what you need from a bike.
yeah. And I think the best way to really figure all that out is to just go take a test ride.
I agree.
Get on the bike, see how it feels.
Exactly.
Trust your gut.
Absolutely.
And hey, if it turns out to be the one for you,
yeah,
let us know.
we'd love to hear about it.
We want to hear all about your adventures on your new Scout Bobber Limited.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And happy riding, everyone.